Hey guys, Pastor Channer here, coming at you with another Logos video. In this video, I want to take a look at the complete biblical library. What is it? Is it worth your time, effort, and energy? Is it worth your money to invest in? Here I plan to do a quick dive into the complete biblical library and give you a good sense of this resource so you can decide if it's right for you. First off, what is the complete biblical library? How did this thing come about? Well, this was published around 1990 by a publisher, I believe, from Springfield, Missouri. So this resource itself is over 3 decades old. Not only that, but when it was started, it took 2 decades at least to complete. It was touted as being a cutting-edge research tool for Bible students and was basically advertised as bridging the gap between the competent layperson and the scholar. Over 500 Bible scholars worked on this thing, and really, there were a lot of people who were lauding the complete biblical library as a resource ahead of its time. Tim LaHaye says, "This is one of the greatest tools for the serious Bible student to come along in my lifetime." And Gleason Archer said, "This is one of the most comprehensive and ambitious editions of the New Testament ever conceived in modern times." So you can see when it came out that it was heavily praised, and a lot of people were looking forward to this resource. But I've had people ask me about this resource. It's a bit dated at this point, over 30 years old, and it came out before a lot of the modern technologies. Does it stand up to modern scrutiny? Does it stand up to the use of Logos Bible software in our day and age? Speaking of that, how did Logos get a hold of this thing anyway? Well, from my understanding, Logos Bible software acquired this resource from Word Search when they basically acquired Word Search just before the release of Logos 10. And they included a bunch of these resources that were Word Search exclusive or at least primary, and they started rolling these things into base packages and out for regular purchase. This resource was put together by Thoralf Gilbrant and many others, and there's actually a really bold claim about it. It says, "A bridge from the island of the theologian to the mainland of the layman is the one way the complete biblical library has been described. It serves the scholar by shortening his research time. It blesses the lay student by revealing the rich treasures of the Greek language found in the New Testament." Does it hold up to scrutiny with this claim? Now, I want to show you how this thing looked in print before I dive into all of the individual resources that are available in Logos. In Logos, it comes as 39 volumes, but this is what it originally looked like in print. You see, those 39 volumes are made up of the interlinear, the individual commentaries, all of the various text versions, the apparatus, and the dictionaries. So there's lots of different resources you're getting here, but understanding how it was originally composed in print, I think is helpful to get a good sense of how you might want to be using this resource when you're referencing it in your Logos Bible software. Here on the left page, you can see this is the interlinear, and it also has the individual numbers that are assigned for the Greek and the Hebrew. I'll be talking about that momentarily. On the far left side, you can see the Greek apparatus, which is tied to all of the individual manuscripts. And then in the middle of the page on the right, this is where the general commentary is. On the far right, you can see the various verses version, and I'll talk about what that various verses or various text version is when we dive in. But this is what it was originally laid out like, a very unique resource, again, really leaning into the print way that we studied the Bible 35 years ago. Now, this thing is not particularly cheap. If you look in Logos Bible software, the day that I'm recording this is $1,033.99, okay? That comes with all of the volumes, both Old and New Testament, but that's pretty pricey. Now, it is included in some base packages, but I want you to know this. If you are leaning into it from a base package perspective, then a lot of your value is being tied up with it. So if you get Baptist Gold, for example, which is, I believe, the lowest base package it's included in, well, then you're getting a lot of your value tied up in the complete biblical library. So you better really like this resource. All right, enough blustering about the background and the history. Let's dig into it and see what exactly it is you get. You get 39 volumes spread out over the entirety of the Old Testament and New Testament, and they take up various things. One of the first things that you get that I think is very interesting is this various versions text, okay? What they have done is they've taken your standard translation of the Bible in the King James Version, but now they've included different ways of translating different phrases from other authors, commentaries, etc. So you can see here in John 3:31, he that cometh from above is above all. That's taken from the King James. But then you have other translation, is greater than all, stands above all, is over all, etc. And you can see these are coming from different authors that they are referencing. Really interesting resource to see them parse the text in this way. In this sense, the various versions text reminds me a bit of a mix between the Catena Aurea, if you know that resource, and the Amplified Bible. You see, the Catena was put together well in church history, and it was a summary of the comments that many early church fathers made on various texts. You can see here in John 3:9 through 12, you have quotes from Chrysostom, Augustine, and others. And these are essentially a compilation of all of their comments. And of course, the Amplified Bible, people are aware of, has various ways of translating the verses, and they're all kind of smashed together. He who comes from above, heaven, is far above all others. He who comes from the earth belongs to the earth and talks the language of the earth. His words are from an earthly standpoint. You can see the Amplified Bible really tries to expand on the individual words and verses to give you a different sense of what it might mean. Well, notice that's exactly what the various version text is doing here. It's taking a series of comments and different ways of translating from other Bible commentators and mashing it up with the verse itself. This is a really interesting and unique resource. I haven't seen this done elsewhere. Now, there's a disadvantage in this, and this is the fact that in our day and age, with Bible software readily available, you can easily reference many different translations all at once. You can bring them up, put them side by side, and just look at them to your heart's content. You can see in this sense that the various versions text would have been a gold mine in a print format when you didn't have other translations readily accessible at your fingertips. However, it's just a bit more limited in our current day and age. That said, I want to offset that a bit because in this unique resource, you are getting all of this as a one-stop shop. You're getting a variety of references compiled together, and that's really invaluable because are you really going to have 20, 30 tabs open of all of these various translations? No, it's really hard to do that. And so I still think there's value in this, especially if you like something like the Amplified Bible. Now, another thing that you are getting with this resource is what I would essentially call the commentary of the resource itself. You can see here are comments on each verse of John chapter 3. Now, in terms of volume, this is very much like a one-volume commentary, but a little bit on steroids. So it's not quite an in-depth single-volume commentary like you'd get in a massive set, but it's also not the brief treatment you would get in a one-volume commentary that is often treating a larger pericope and only dedicating a few paragraphs. Instead, here you have almost a paragraph per verse or maybe a couple of sentences at least. So you're getting a little bit more depth here than you would get with a single-volume commentary. Now, I will say, as I was reading through, I noticed the fact that it shows that the author, at least who wrote the John version, has a little greater understanding of other commentaries on the market and often references other interpretations of a passage. That's really helpful. Not only that, you can't forget the extensive resources at the end of each volume. It's not only a Bible commentary, but it's also kind of like a Bible handbook or an introduction to that book of the Bible. If you go to the back of each book, you can see there's an extensive discussion of overview, and there's an outline and a lot of other information that is really valuable. Now, the commentary itself was a bit uneven, but this is always the case when you have multiple authors contributing to an individual commentary. The fact that it's all bound in the complete biblical library is good, but just know that when you reference different books of the Bible, you're just going to find some of those comments a little bit uneven. Let's move on now to the Greek apparatus. And this is, I think, where the complete biblical library is showing its age a little bit. You see, we have much more complete apparatuses available to us in Logos Bible software these days, so this one's a little bit limited in that sense. And not only that, we have commentaries like Philip Comfort and Metzger that talk about each of the individual manuscripts, why they're assumed to have the translation they have, etc. And this, I feel, does neither well. It's not an in-depth, complete, exhaustive apparatus, and yet at the same time, it's not really doing the commentary portion well. Again, remember what the individual would be looking at in their day and age. It would be very valuable to have the apparatus available to them right next to their interlinear. But in our day and age today, I just don't see the value as much. much. The next resource I want to point you to is the Harmonization of the Gospels resource. This resource is probably different enough in kind from all of the other resources that they could not have included it. If they just got rid of it and it wasn't included, you wouldn't even notice that it's missing. However, don't take that to mean it's not a helpful or important resource. I actually find this harmony to be really interesting to read. First of all, harmonies of the Gospels are many throughout church history, and it's nice to have another additional resource of this kind. There are different ways of alluding to Jesus' ministry and different ways of stitching together the Gospels. I find that handy. There are helpful tables in this one, and really, these cool pictures that they include throughout, I think are really helpful and interesting. Honestly, this resource will probably not be referenced in the same way that you use the rest of the complete biblical library, but I would happily utilize this resource as like an individual devotional and just read through it throughout the year, and I think you'd get great value out of that between the pictures, the short explanations, and then the biblical text right there for you from all four Gospels. Now let's get into the Bible dictionaries. Now I want you to know that originally these dictionaries were in multiple volumes, I think 6+ in the entire set, but here in Logos, they're boiled down into just these two volumes right here. One for the Old Testament Hebrew and one for the New Testament Greek. Now, I want you to know I was very skeptical when I approached these initially. They reference the Strong's system. I'm not a huge fan of Strong's. I just think we've surpassed that technology. Some might still use it, and it might be good for print, but utilizing Logos, we don't need Strong's numbers anymore. And often these older resources, they tend to fall into word study fallacies, and I was just really skeptical jumping into this thing initially. Now, although this resource is not completely immune to word study fallacies and problems of its time and day and age, I will say this, it is substantially better than I thought it would be. In fact, it's not too much to say that these two dictionaries are my favorite resources in the entire set. You see, I often struggle to find meaningful content on the word study level that is accessible. The fact of the matter is that when I'm doing my studies, I am often diving really deep into the biggest lexicons, trying to understand all of the constructions and everything else about the word, because those are the resources I know that offer that. However, I don't always have time to dig through the in-depth theological lexicons, etc. And this resource actually does a fantastic job of bridging the gap. Yes, there are these in-depth concordances and things like that, but once you get past that, many of the individual words have great little blurbs talking about how they're used, what they mean, etc. And I find this to be really helpful. Here, for example, you can see this word can be found in classical Greek as an adverb of time meaning momentary, immediately, for the present, etc. Talks about the Septuagint, talks about the Latin Vulgate, New Testament usage. These two paragraphs are pure gold because you would have to dig for hours in a theological lexicon trying to pull out a similar amount of readily available value that you can take into the pulpit. Don't get me wrong, this is only going to serve as dipping the toe in your water for deep theological research, but that's not always what I'm trying to do. And the fact of the matter is that this resource bridges that gap very well. Not only that, the unique numbering system that is utilized actually hyperlinks. So every time you click on one of these individual numbers, it takes you to the resource in kind. And when you click on the numbers for Hebrew, it takes you to the corresponding Hebrew word as well. Very nice. My one negative of this resource is that when you go down towards the bottom of each of the individual sections, you can see that it references Strong, Bauer, Moulton and Milligan, and Liddell Scott. Here's my problem. When I click Bauer, it actually links me to the older version of Bauer. This is not new 3rd edition BDAG, it's old 2nd edition BDAG. I don't even own that resource, and I'm not sure Logos even sells it anymore. So that's my one negative on this front. Finally, guys, let's take a look at the interlinear before I dive into my final thoughts. Here's what the interlinear looks like, and you can imagine, again, in print, this would be super valuable. I just prefer Logos's interlinears, customizable for each individual version of the Bible. You can have it laid out in different formats, and it just feels easier to use. So I'm not readily going to be utilizing this interlinear for my own prep and study. However, I will say this, the inclusion of the individual words that link directly to what I just said is one of the strongest resources. That's pretty handy. You see, I can, in Logos, go ahead and right-click and find that word in my lexicon, etc., but I still don't have that quick access to the information I'm looking for. Instead, if I utilize their structure right here, I can actually go to those individual words, and I can be in one of the strongest resources that CBL offers right away. The interlinear is valuable from that standpoint, just the very fact that it links together. All right, guys, what are my final thoughts on CBL, the Complete Biblical Library? Well, honestly, I'm going to tell you, I was very surprised. This resource was way better than I expected it to be. I expected it to be dated at this point, showing its age, and really not worth consulting. Now, don't get me wrong, it is a high price tag currently in Logos for what you're getting. The material there is a little bit older, but they have done a lot of really good work on creating a seamless package here. I love how the dictionary works, and I think that it fulfills that statement of being a bridge that it said right at the outset. Again, it says, a bridge from the island of the theologian to the mainland of the layman is one way the Complete Biblical Library has been described. I think they hit the nail on the head with this statement. I feel like as a pastor or preacher, I should be referencing this work weekly because it's going to help me hit very quickly the high points, especially of word studies or those individual various verses, texts, and I'm going to be able to include that in my sermon. The only caveat I would say is know the level of scholarship that this resource occupies. This is not the deepest level of scholarship. If you quote this resource in a paper for your seminary class, you might get docked or it might not count. This is simultaneously this resource's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. I need resources like this as a pastor and preacher because I can reference it quickly, get some good information fast, and I can begin focusing my area of studies without being bogged down in details. I told you that I think the best way to get this resource is through base packages. I believe Baptist Gold has it as its lowest level, and I believe it's also included in a few base packages above that in different traditions or denominations. That's it. That's my take on the Complete Biblical Library. I'm going to start referencing it weekly, and we'll see how it goes for me. Appreciate you all watching us here on YouTube. Thank you so much for supporting our channel here at Pastor Tanner. Please consider supporting our Patreon so we can do more of these videos and put out more content like this in the future. Appreciate you all very much, and we'll see you again real soon. Take care. God bless. Bye.